Exciting news, though. The next speaker is Jim Seconde.
Hello. Welcome back to my bedroom, which, if anyone... James is just like, I'm out of here. If anyone saw the intro video, then you'll be aware that this is the same bedroom that I set the challenge for Fusion. So yeah, thanks to James, who's my Fusion teammate. But you'll see that I'm wearing a different hoodie today, and that's going to be sort of part of my talk. I don't know if my slides are visible or not, but I don't think they are. There we go. Thanks, James, or the production team. Hello, everybody. So I am wearing a Vonage hoodie, which are my employers. And what I'm going to talk to you today is about developer relations. I don't necessarily expect you to know what developer relations is, but good news. I'm going to talk about it and how I got into it, which is kind of important because it's a career path that I took accidentally. And there are lessons to be learnt, and if anyone wants to find out what it is and doesn't know what it is, or they do know what it is and want to see a kind of path into it, then that's what I'm here for. So, quick little bit about me first. Hello, here are my things. So I'm quite active, as a lot of people in developer relations are, on Twitter, which is at Seconde. If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, there I am. /in/Seconde. And if you want to see, this is after all a hackathon, so in line with that, there is a graveyard of unfinished projects on GitHub, as always with everyone. So that's a little bit about me. So to get started, a little bit of a background. So the way I'm going to structure this is a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about my career path, and it's not going to be a whole sort of like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, because there are valid kind of lessons. So I'm going to talk through like how it is that I ended up setting on this path, and how you can, what you can do if you're interested in this area of tech, right? So I have two main interests from when I was a teenager. One is computers, not surprisingly, and the reason why that is a Mac like that is an old world Mac is it was old school Macs before they were kind of cool. They were very uncool and no one really used them, and this is before Mac OS X, right? So this is like System 8 and stuff like that. And the other thing that I loved was theatre. So I was always interested in drama, right? So the two things I don't know whether it's that unusual, but you know, the things that I used to do were either go on stage and do acting, or I would sit in the computer room at school for hours and hours on end, pretty much taking apart applications. So you know, a sort of a natural combination of introvert versus extrovert. I had to pick one of these things to sort of drive my direction of my career, right? And you have to choose supposedly what you're strongest in, and that seemed to be English literature and theatre, right? So that's what I did. So I went to this city to go and make my fortune. I went to London, and I joined the Rosebery Branch Theatre, which is a small fringe theatre on the edge of Islington. And I ended up being technical manager there for about sort of 7 or 8 years, doing a lot of lighting. I wasn't on stage, but I was doing a lot of lighting design and sound design, and a lot of theatre theory and actual practical experience, right? And I loved my time doing it. But when I started doing work at the Rosebery Branch, I needed to earn money. This sounds ridiculous, right? But the pay in fringe theatre, right? It's not great. So I went to a temping agency to get an office job. And they saw that I was interested in computers. And so I got a job unexpectedly as a sort of QA. So what ended up happening is with my theatre kind of career that I was attempting, right? What actually happened was I had a dual kind of thing where I went into business intelligence. So I ended up doing QA for the massive, well, I say massive, that's not true, with sort of AI and data science and stuff like that, now tiny by comparison, but I was doing QA for an Oracle database. And then I started working with SQL Server, doing kind of business intelligence development. And then my first programming language was Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. Now, I'm not a big fan of tech elitism, and you'll kind of get a little bit of a hint of it later on in the talk. But I would not recommend that anybody starts out for Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. But this is a hackathon, and the fact that most people are using Ruby, Python, and JavaScript leads me to believe that it's pretty unlikely that everyone's using VBA, right? But that's because I was put on that career path where they said, well, can you maintain our applications? They're in VBA. Can you learn a bit of VBA? So I did. So the scales kind of tipped and my career started going towards the tech career. And I kind of gave up the theatre thing and I stopped having to do that. I was working 2 jobs at the same time. But if I was going to proceed in the tech direction, I needed direction, right? And I needed to advance my career in that way. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't have the availability of things like, I don't have a computer science degree. I have a degree in theatre, right? I'm trained as an actor, and my dissertation was on stand-up comedy. So I don't have that comp science kind of direction of what I kind of want to do. And also things like Hack the Midlands or MLH and things like this, they're just kind of, I didn't know about them. And I really hate that slide because it looks really sort of clip arty 90s. I didn't know where to go, right? And there weren't events like these that were well publicized in the kind of late 2000s. So 2 major things happened, right? First of all, I picked a technology, and secondly, I discovered something else. The first thing is I picked PHP. I picked PHP because it just said the internet was mainly written in it, right? For anybody from the hackathon community within Hack the Midlands, if you have preconceptions about PHP being old, it's not anymore. It's very, very modern. You can do very, very cool stuff that you can do with any other programming language. But I'm not here to talk about that. That's for a different day. The important bit here was Meetup. I just went on Meetup and just found JavaScript groups, PHP groups, DevOps groups. And I just started going to them, not knowing what on earth I was getting myself in for, right? Because I didn't have any of this background of I wasn't a developer. But I wanted to be a full stack web developer. And obviously from that, what I got was it just opened my eyes to an amazing world of community. And it really is genuinely amazing going to local community meetup groups, right? I learned Symfony framework in the PHP world, and then I learned Laravel, and then I learned Vue.js. The concepts of working commercially as a developer with Git and GitHub, and then working with, Docker was in its kind of infancy when I started hearing about it. And then I started learning it, and this is long before the sort of, really Kubernetes kind of pushed it on a bit, right? So I learned all these things by going to meetups, not understanding the talks, and then going up to the people that are speaking afterwards and going, what is this thing? And they go, okay, cool, let's sit down and have a beer. Right, it's this and this and this. It was free training, and it was mind-boggling that people were just willing to give you their time just for free. And we'll just train it. And it's all a community kind of, the kind of unspoken word of, well, you give the knowledge for free because it's going to come back later, the whole karma cycle, right? And it trained me, and I learned about how tech communities like this work. And it was really eye-opening, but it sounded like, it sounds like I'm pushing it for the technology that I learned, right? That was not the biggest thing that I learned going to these meetups. It was stuff outside of technology stacks, which was amazing. I learned about things like burnout. The first person I saw speak on burnout specifically was Jess Rose, and more on that in a minute. I learned about imposter syndrome. Ironically, I just mentioned Jess Rose, who did a talk on imposter syndrome, right? Really, really amazing stuff. I learned about codes of conduct. I learned about diversity and inclusion and how to include people within tech, right? These are things they don't teach you, where you just learn flat out, I'm going to go on a programming language course, right? And there's a Bitcoin logo. That's not because I learned about Bitcoin. I learned about Bitcoin bros. I learned about tech bros. I learned about elitism and gatekeeping, right? And I even wrote my first talk on gatekeeping specifically. And the last image on there that is really, really important, I couldn't find a decent icon for a trash fire, so I just chose a bin, was I learned from other people what practices are really bad in technology and when companies are doing bad and should feel bad, and when they're mistreating employees, and when you talk to people that are at the top of their game at meetups who are willing to give you their time, and they're like, yeah, your company shouldn't be treating you like this. You can do better. Why not this? Why not this? Why not this? It's amazing how much you learn to really start valuing yourself and your skills, right? And nobody can teach you that by just going on a coding course. This is where community was amazing for me, right? So that's all the meetups and stuff like that, right? So a massive event happened in 2017 for me. This was all in London, right? I left London after 12 years and I moved to, and this is Hack the Midlands, so probably not that surprising, I moved to Birmingham. And I took all of the knowledge that I got from all of the big meetup scenes, like the DevOps scene and the Python scene and the PHP scene in London, and I didn't know, moving out of London from a tech hub of the world, moving to Birmingham, I didn't know what to expect, right? And the reality was that I had to dig deep a bit and I had to learn about the ecosystem that was completely different. And you have to dig a bit deeper here. But the community you find is exactly the same, but it's not quite as hectic and there's less of it. So it's not like London where there's 500 things happening at once, right? So key things happened here. And these are things that shaped my career, right? First of all, there was a PHP user group in Birmingham. It was called PHP West Midlands, and it was one of the oldest ones, but it had become defunct. It had just been kind of left because this happens with meetup groups and community groups all the time, that people have to give up their free time and they have to volunteer, and sometimes it just doesn't happen. So I took it upon myself to relaunch it. So I created Brum PHP. And that ran sort of successfully under my watch for about a year and a half or 2 years, I think. I created it from seeing how PHP user groups elsewhere kind of ran and thought, well, if I just take their lead, then I can do this, right? And to tell the truth, it was a bit demanding, but it was fun. I already had the networking and I knew PHP speakers. And so I knew the ecosystem. So I just asked people and they said, yeah, sure, I'll come to Birmingham, I'll speak. And you're like, okay, right. These are people that are leading like BDD and TDD, a mass concept in tech. And they're like, yeah, I'll come to Birmingham. Okay, I don't have any money. And they're like, I don't care. I just want to speak and I want to talk to people. It's amazing what community in tech can drive, right? And the second thing that was massive was Hannah and Andy spoke to me and said, would you like to become part of the Fusion team? And I didn't know what Fusion was at that point. Well, I did actually, but I hadn't managed to attend one. And so I joined the Fusion team. We are obviously sponsoring Hack the Midlands. The big thing is the meetup. The meetup is like a cross-platform thing. There's a lot. It's somewhat .NET-y and Microsofty, but it crosses into DevOps. We've had JavaScript, we've had PHP, we've had Python, we've had data science. Two of the speakers, Jess Rose and Danny, have both spoken at Fusion recently. So, I think Jess has. Don't quote me on that. She's probably in the chat, basically saying, "No, I haven't," or maybe I have. But importantly, I'm just going to sort of disguise this with a little mystic, cryptic thing here, saying like, "This is an icon that comes from the community." The second thing I did after moving to Birmingham is I started speaking, because I didn't think that I had anything to speak about in tech, and it turns out after some life experiences that I did. So there's an example. There's me speaking at the NorDev conference in Norwich, which was kind of just before the closing keynote, and that was on kind of tech gatekeeping and elitism. It was a kind of a big talk. I'll mention the subject of that talk a bit later of why it's probably not ideal to start with. But anyway, that comes under the speaking icon there. Writing. I joined dev.to, and it's a big part of stuff that I get involved in the community is writing and sharing knowledge. So I just went on to dev.to and I started writing articles about things that I was doing at the time. So there's an example article that I wrote for a previous employer a year and a bit ago, 2 years ago. And I mean, it had a lot of hits, but I didn't really care. It was just because I wanted to start writing, right? And you don't have to write massive articles. You can just do sort of small tidbits, right? Then I started teaching. In my theatre degree, I'd already done bits of teaching anyway, and sort of mentoring. I was mentoring like epileptic kids, and sort of using drama and theatre to actually teach them about life. So I continued that in a sort of a tech way. So I joined Code Bar, which is run by Matt Rose, for a bit, which is teaching underrepresented groups in tech to teach them coding and things like that. And then infamously, I mean, lots of attendees might or might not know School of Code, but its home is in Birmingham. But I did a few talks at School of Code, and then I started joining the mentoring with my previous employer, Jump24, who still regularly mentor people with an amazing level of support that Jump24 gives people and the rest of all the mentors, right? So that falls under the teaching banner. I was doing all of this because this is what joining community and doing meetups and things like this just kind of teaches you is the right thing to do, because I've been handed a career on a plate by just going and talking to people, right? And then when moving to Birmingham, something that kind of I describe as fate happened. A previous speaker who I've already mentioned just now, I bumped into her and talked to her quite a bit. I bumped into Jess Rose, right? And there's her Twitter. You've already seen her speak. She's spoken on imposter syndrome. And she said, do you know what you do, Jim? What you do is you do a thing called developer relations. And I said, I don't know what on earth you're talking about. I'm a developer and then I do community stuff. And she went, well, the thing is, what do you do? And she goes, well, you do speaking, right? You do speak on stage. And I said, yes. And then she said, right, you do community stuff and you do like community outreach and you run a PHP user group, right? And you're involved in Fusion. And I said, yes. And she said, you do writing and stuff like that on dev.to or Medium and things like this. And I said, yes. And then she said, okay, but you also do mentoring and tutoring, right? And you actually teach people. And I said, yes. And she went, okay, so what you do is you do developer relations, and someone who practices developer relations is a developer advocate. And I went, okay, it's a thing. I didn't know what this thing is. That's my career path into developer relations. So now I'm going to explain exactly how these things came about and what it is in the industry. So it brings me back to the question of what is developer relations? Let's go back a bit first to just explain it. Evangelism within tech has been around for a very long time, right? Since what I don't know about the mid 80s, the late 80s. And evangelism was traditionally kind of looked a bit like this. You'd have things that are consumed by developers. So in this kind of example, you've got something like Visual Studio or core things from Microsoft products. So you've got like Red Hat or other Linux kind of distributions around the time, or Unixy type things, but Red Hat kind of stands out, or stuff from IBM. If you'd had Apple, you'd have maybe like Macintosh Programmers Workshop, things like that. You've got like SQL Server is a good example of things like this, and Oracle and things like that. And what you'd have is you'd have somebody you'd have like the C-level saying, right, okay, we need to get this product to developers. And the way you do that is the same way that you do it with everything else. And that is you use marketing. Because it's a product, right? You've got a product and you've got a consumer. So marketing. Except, we're at a hackathon. A lot of you are hackers. A lot of you are developers. There has been limited success. And I can't do a blanket kind of yes or no to this, but largely not really. Didn't go down very well. And my kind of anecdote for this is I went to a SQL event. It was a SQL Server event in Reading in about 2008. And two evangelists were on stage, and they were from marketing, and they knew what buttons to click to like show off SQL Server Cloud at the time. But when something went wrong, they didn't know what to do because they were marketers, right? They're like salespeople and they know how to talk to people, but they're not engineers. They're not developers, right? So that causes like a bit of a problem. So with that in mind, like things have changed, and this is why evangelism has evolved into something called developer relations, right? Largely. Things that are important to people now within tech are things like ethics and good open source citizenry, using open source, right? And previously, decision makers would probably be like big managers at the top would be like, right, we're going to buy this product that is distributed by buying lots and lots of licenses, and then we give it. That doesn't happen anymore. You've got startups, you've got people that are freelancers that do single products, you've got open source maintainers. That there are decision makers at all levels, at end user level, right? That completely changes how things are done. And we have the internet is our primary source of distribution, that web apps are, right? Something that is really, really massive that you'll hear people that work in developer relations, or specifically at a company called Hobbit, who have introduced this a kind of a model around this, is that software is now adopted it's not sold. It's to do with getting like free tier signups or trying to show you that kind of, you think about sort of things that are big at the moment, like Next.js or Gatsby and things like that. It's adopted to get a developer hooked into an ecosystem and contributing back to it. And then when they get higher level or they get to a senior level, right, they're making the decisions and then they can purchase, like an enterprise tier level kind of plan. So this is a completely changing atmosphere of how software is kind of used, right? And really the crux of why evangelism turned into developer relations is, who would you like to speak to, right? Would you like a marketer, or would you like someone in sales go, buy our product, buy our product, buy our product? Or do you want to speak to an actual engineer that maintains it? Kind of makes sense, right? Or, at least it does to me, but it does to the wider industry quite a lot. So we have kind of definitions for developer relations, and I'm using a quite classic example. I say classic. It was written by a developer relations consultant called Matt Revel, who's kind of local to Shropshire to us here. He runs an agency called Hoopy. And Hoopy outlined 4 key pillars of developer relations of what it is that we do. And they are outlined here as outreach, community, product, and education and support. So if we map kind of my journey that I described to you, it looks like this. The outreach, there we go. I'm doing speaking. Community, obviously things like Brum PHP that I started, or Fusion, or community events like this, Hack the Midlands itself, things like Cough Hack, all of these kind of things of going and speaking to developers one-to-one when we're researching what it is they use and what they do. Education and support comes under the mentoring, obviously, but also a lot of educational stuff around blog post writing, and that kind of includes other things. And we'll get onto things like Twitch and streaming. The last thing in my career path that was missing was products, and products is kind of a big key of it, because it's a big key aspect of it. Because if you have a key product, like you have an API, or you have like a software as a service, or a platform as a service, or something like that, the whole point of what you're doing is you can get feedback directly from the developers that are using your API or your service, right? And that means you can feed directly back to the people that write the product. That's a two-way kind of street. It was something that was missing in my career, and that has been now completely filled by Vonage, because Vonage has a product. And I will very briefly, because this is not a sales pitch, but I will tell you about what we do, but it might be quite useful to anyone that's putting together a project right now. So I did say this was more about talking to you about anyone that wants to go down this path, or anyone that's interested in this kind of career, right? I'm going to just tell you about how you can set yourself up for success in this, if this is what you want to do. First of all, speaking, right? I mentioned to you I started speaking. I did a very, very poor move. My first talk was written as a 50-minute keynote talk pitched to conferences on a massive political hot potato in tech. I would recommend don't do that, right? Because that's not a great idea. I had something to say and I wanted to say it, but it's very... I thought that I sort of knew best and I could do it, right? But it's not how I would recommend starting. I reckon start with lightning talks. Lightning talks are 10 to 15 minute talks that meetups regularly do and they put on, right? If they don't do it, maybe ask them about whether they want to hear about sort of doing a quick 5 to 10 minute pitch about something. And the key here is that you start small, and a big theme around developer relations. If you think you don't have something to talk about, it's almost certainly not true. If you think, yeah, but other people must have done that, it's almost certainly not true. There are so many niches in here. I mean, probably one of the most popular programming languages that's being used within Hack the Midlands is probably JavaScript. If you use JavaScript, you know what the ecosystem is like on the front end and the back end. There's a million libraries, right? If you think, someone else has probably done a lightning talk on there, who knows? They might have done it. They might not have done. Just do it. If you don't think you've got a subject matter, you might be wrong. And people want to know about these things because, after all, we are here for learning all the time, right? The big thing here is get involved in your community. And in Birmingham, you can speak to me, or you can speak to Hannah, you can speak within the Hack the Midlands team themselves, right? we all network with each other, and we all talk to each other quite a lot. And in DevRel, we especially talk to each other within our own organizations, right, across the globe. But the community can offer so much kind of knowledge and power. It's unbelievable. Get involved in the community, because if they don't set you on necessarily the DevRel path, they might set you on a DevOps path and how you get into that, or they might set you into a data science path, right? The amount of learning you can get is really, really big. Streaming has, I mean, this is, we're streaming now, right? And we're streaming specifically on this platform. Streaming is starting to change the face of bits of how we do learning and how we do DevRel, right? So if you see various people and how popular it's become, they're just coding online, and it's similar to that kind of, it's got massive parallels to that kind of gaming profile and that whole sort of massive League of Legends and Minecraft kind of thing. It's transitioned into coding so much, and like I said before, if you don't think that it's worth streaming, you might be probably wrong, and people have a lot to gain to that. There's people that I've seen that have absolutely mastered this kind of path. The person that springs to mind specifically is White Panther, who's Salma Alam-Naylor, who works for Contentful, and her streams have just gone massive. They're absolutely incredible. The kind of community she's built single-handedly for Contentful. Writing, like I said, write on anything. Just write on stuff, and people will read it, and you'll get feedback from it. You'll get comments, mostly hopefully positive, but we'll get onto that a little bit. They're not always going to be positive, but get writing, and you will get feedback, and you will get that kind of, if you're writing about something interesting, you'll get kind of like nice emojis back, and people are actually interested. It's really cool having that feeling. Mentoring obviously is, for early stage, you might not be comfortable about it, but the idea here is the cycle of feedback of when you get to a level where you feel comfortable and you're actually involved in like the tech industry, and you're like a mid-level developer, or you feel like you've mastered something, or even kind of like not necessarily mastered, but you've got involved and you know a lot about something. Enroll in mentoring. We have School of Code here. We have Code Your Future here. We have Code Bar. There's so many. There's like there's Code Girls First. Danny, who I don't know whether she's going to relaunch it or not, but has already done Django Girls Birmingham, or Django Birmingham. It's things like this, right? If you keep your finger on the pulse, you can give back to the community, and it's massively rewarding once you feel comfortable enough to do that, right? And secondly, contribute to open source, right? A lot of you will be using loads of libraries. A lot of you, when doing hacking, from Python libraries and NPM libraries and things like that, will be kind of familiar with this, but be careful. It can be a bit like the Wild West, but if you see a project and you see like a code of conduct and you read the contributing guidelines and you feel comfortable in that space, get back to open source, and you will learn commercial stuff, right? But open source features quite heavily in developer relations quite a lot, because you're interacting one-to-one with other developers that are involved possibly in your product, or you can involve with people of other products, and then you'll speak to other people. Like as a developer advocate, you might speak to other developer advocates. It's kind of, part of the whole thing. Whilst it sounds like a bit of a downer, it is quite important, and this is like, we're sort of coming to a conclusion now, but honestly, these are really, really important things. If you have heard of developer relations, you might have heard misconceptions about them. So just a quick thing to put things right about them, right? First thing, this one comes up a lot, right? It's if you get into developer relations, your companies fly you all around the world, and you get this glamorous lifestyle of sitting on planes and then being taken to lunch everywhere, and you get this kind of like rock star lifestyle, right? Whilst it's true in some cases, you might have to go to conferences somewhere. The important thing is you might have to. The important thing is, if you're involved in developer relations, you're serving the community for the technology stack that you are representing, or the product you're representing. If all of your developer community, from the statistics that you look at, happen to be based on the outskirts of Birmingham, then your job is to go to the outskirts of Birmingham, right? It's wherever you're needed. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you go on jollies all around the world. And you might be working for a startup in developer relations. Like a lot of first hires in developer relations can be for startups. And budgets are limited. We've had COVID. The amount of outreach that you can do via Twitch, via YouTube, via meetups has now changed significantly. So in person is very important for a lot of DevRel, but also it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be put on a plane all around the world of first class, right? We're not all rock stars, and rockstar is a phrase that I would very much encourage anybody not to use. A second kind of follow-up to this, and this is really, really important, and it's because I've had first-hand knowledge of this and I've heard it, is DevRel is really easy. You can have a career path into engineering and DevOps if you want to, and you could become a senior DevOps engineer, and that's where the real people in tech really do their work, right? Or you can go into DevRel, right, and it's like you don't have to know as much, really engineering wise, and then you just do some talks now and again, and then whilst it is true that developer relations tends to be paid quite highly, it does not mean it's easy. It's not easy at all. You don't have the focus of just having a tech career in engineering or language development in a specific thing if you're an app developer. You have to change your hats very regularly. It's hard. It's very, very hard. It's very demanding. In DevRel, we tend to be very wary of burnout and the signs of it very quickly to shut it down, because you have to be blog post writing, you have to travel to conferences, you might be doing online content, you might be streaming, and you might have to juggle all of those things in your time in one day. So you do get paid well to do it, but it's hard. It is really hard. And also, another weird thing, right, is a lot of people think that it's the be all and end all. And a lot of people say that you should get into DevRel because it's in demand, right? And some people are hiring, and I've come across this quite a bit. Companies are hiring for DevRel that don't really need it, but they've heard that other people have DevRel. And that is not a very good excuse for hiring DevRel, right? And it doesn't mean that everyone has to have it, and it doesn't mean that you have to get involved in it. This is just a primer for what we do, right? And of what we do in this niche of the industry. But it's not for everyone. You don't have to do it at all. Like I said, it's quite hard, but it's quite a niche skill set that you might not have known about before. And if you didn't know about it before, hopefully if you've watched this, you might have some questions and you might want to get involved in it and go, well, hang on a minute, some of this might be for me. So in sort of conclusion to that, really, there's lots of different niche areas within DevRel as well. If you only want to do the writing, it might be for you, because a really important thing is that DevRel is different for each company, because every company's needs and requirements from its developers are also different, right? So some might have more emphasis on, they might outline developer education, for instance, and they might want more writing, or they might have a lot of API stuff and they might focus on documentation a lot more, right? So it kind of varies, or they might want to do loads and loads of outreach to get brand awareness as quickly as possible. So the thing is here is it's very, very varied. But if it's something that you want to hear about or you want to know more about, I'm obviously representing Hack the Midlands here as part of Vonage, but also part of Fusion as well. So I'm sort of here twice, in sort of the capacity of two things. What I do want to tell you about is what I do after I've told you about my journey, and I've told you what we do in the industry. The last bit is what I do now, right? And this is what I do. So at Vonage, I'm the native PHP advocate. We have one language specialist within our team, one for Android, one for iOS, one for Python, etc., etc. At Vonage, we do voice APIs, we do SMS stuff, conversation, and video APIs. So if you want to send SMS, you want to send something to WhatsApp, that's what our APIs do. We're a comms company, we're an international comms company, right? I say internet, we're a multinational comms company. So what I do is I do some customer service stuff and some tickets and Jira style customer feedback, but then I also write the SDKs for PHP, and I also do sort of mentoring and teach people, and then I maintain and look at sort of specialities within some products that we do, right? So that's what I do. The important thing is I'm on the Discord. If you want to incorporate some stuff, I've got if you want to incorporate Vonage in some stuff that you do, like classic example, in your project, you want like a quick fire OAuth and two-factor authentication, and you want to send an SMS out, give me a shout. I'll hook you up. Our API is pretty straightforward. I'd like to say that our documentation is pretty good. So that's the only little bit of the sales pitch that you'll hear from me, because part of DevRel is, like you've seen, not doing loads and loads of marketing. I have been Jim Seconde. Thank you very much, and hopefully James is going to pop up in the studio bang on time.
Hello. Hey, Jim, brilliant. I work with people in DevRel, for example, for Fusion, and honestly, I've never quite understood what you all do, so I needed this talk.
Hopefully that might have explained. A lot of people see it as a bit of a mystery, or they think it's like a joke job title that doesn't really sort of exist. It is very clearly outlined.
On the job title note, what does the avocado mean in your Twitter bio?
Oh, right. Okay. Is that actually a question from the floor?
It's a question from me.
Oh, okay. So somebody did a blog post. I can't remember who it was. I think it was one of the sort of the leading industry people in DevRel called Mary Thengvall. I think it was her anyway. She did a blog post talking about how actually we're like kind of avocados because of, and there was a big explanation from it. I can't remember what it was, but it became the universal kind of symbol for anyone that's a developer advocate. An advocate is like avocado, and then there's like, oh, there's a and then do you know what? If anyone wants to see it, I can post you a link to it. But there was very sort of tenuous links, and it's become the kind of de facto symbol for anyone involved in DevRel.
Brilliant. And it sounds like you're doing awesome stuff over at Vonage.
It has been absolutely awesome, and the stuff that we're doing in Vonage has been really cool to sort of get involved with the team. It's good stuff.
Awesome. I thought it was pronounced like Vonage earlier.
It is Vonage.
Vonage.
Some of the team actually had this where everyone thought it was like French, where it was like Vonage.
Vonage.
Bonjour. Je travaille à Vonage. C'est une télécommunication par le Paris. No, it's Vonage.
Je n'ai parlé français. Anyway, we do have some questions.
Pas de problème.
Okay, some questions. What do you love about DevRel that made you choose it over just being a standard full-time code writing dev?
Well, the truth of the matter is, I didn't know. Like I said in the journey, I didn't know this thing existed. So, to me, the theatre thing just got put aside. So my career trajectory was always, I'm going to be like a full stack dev, and that's it, right? So when I found out that I could be a full stack dev, because I still write code all the time. In fact, I still write code about, according to even my specific job title, about 70% of the time, right? I'm still an engineer, but then I get to go on stage and I get to talk about it, or I get to go on camera and then start teaching people. It was just like, oh, well, this is kind of a no-brainer. I love this. So it just mixes up the job. So it kind of felt like a natural pairing for me. And like I said, it's not for everyone. It's a bit weird and niche, but to be able to do the job that I love, I just coding, and then also to be able to do theatre stuff, which is what I'm supposed to be good at, unless you've all fallen asleep. I mean, I've got one question, right, and that's engagement from one person, so I've had minor success there, right? To be able to do that is what drew me to being able to this direction of thinking I can do this and I love it.
Yeah, that's a nice segue into our next question, actually, from a fellow theatre nerd. What's your favourite show that you've worked on?
And I did not expect that. That's a real curveball. I want to outline all of the really crazy, mad shows that have been like absolutely chaotic and a nightmare, but I'm not going to. I'm going to choose something that was genuinely amazing. I think my favourite show that I worked on was I can't remember what it was actually called, which sounds really bad because the memory of it was so bonkers, right? I worked with someone who is now the associate director at the Rosebery Branch Theatre called Scarlett Pluvier-Commons, right? And she's absolutely amazing as a theatre mind. And we worked on a show that was written in the 70s, and it was an imaginary meeting between Hitler and Mussolini's wives, kind of talking in talking in a very sort of weird, arty, intellectual capacity, and we did it on site. We did it at 30. We were going to do it at 33 Portland Place, which is in central London, and it was owned by a man that was a fake duke or something like that. He was a fake lord, and he bought his title, and he was having a massive court case about the fact that he kept on. He had a what's it called, an electronic tag put on and an ASBO, because he kept on violating all of the terms of his residency at this place, right? And I turned up, and Daniel Radcliffe one day was doing a photo shoot with Vogue whilst we were trying to rehearse. It was just absolutely bonkers. Anyway, that got shut down, so we had to move to another one of his houses over the road in Portland Place, and then I had to do stage management for this at this point, and there was like police hanging around, and then there was drug dealers upstairs, and there was like celebrities coming to buy their cocaine. It was just absolutely mad. I really wish I could remember the name of the show, but in conventional terms, I worked with a director called Helen Tennyson, and she did an adaptation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and that was absolutely mind-blowing. That's more the kind of boring thing that you wanted rather than the crazy story, but I have lots of stories of my time in theatre, and it was kind of wacky.
Crikey, I'm going to bother you for more of these stories.
Well, more story. Oh, there's more.
Yeah, we have a few more questions to get through. So regarding getting into DevRel, was it a suggestion from your employer or you? And if it was you, how did you sell it?
I did it. I got into it by as I said in the journey in the talk, I got into it by accident. Like, I was doing those things because I was talking to other devs at meetups, and it was just the kind of done thing. It's a bit like that magic thing of hackathons, like the culture of hackathons that like you have at Hack the Midlands, where you just know what the right thing and the wrong thing, and how to help people and how to adhere to the code of conduct. It's this unwritten thing that you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. I just got into it by accident, and I think that I would what I said in the slide about if you want to choose this career path and how to get into it, I would recommend taking those steps. And like I said, if anyone wants mentoring and they want to talk to me about how you start doing those, right, just give me a shout on the Discord. I'd recommend doing that because a lot of employers in general, across tech, even product companies in tech, right, don't really know DevRel, and they don't know this niche, because the employees that do happen to be companies that are either startups and have to get it because their product is a tech product that's focused on developers as their customers, or they're massive multinationals. So it's not really a surprise that companies like, that pioneer DevRel, people like Sneak and HashiCorp and Vonage itself, or under its previous name Nexmo. These guys, Microsoft themselves, and the way they've pushed into open source, have used a lot of DevRel to that. I mean, in terms of Microsoft, people like Layla and Chloe Condon are huge, big names within Microsoft DevRel, and that's been very much on purpose. They're the companies that get it and they know it. In terms of getting into that space, if your employer is not in that kind of sphere, or they're not a startup, they won't know about it. You need to make the journey yourself, and that's why you need to speak to other people to try and set you on that path. That's how I'd answer that.
Awesome. Kind of related, I think. A lot of DevRels seem to come from these non-tech backgrounds. Does this help, or is it even necessary?
It's kind of a big one. That it's a big question, because I think that. So there are other talks out there from various people that I would say are either sort of peers of mine in DevRel, or they're actual friends of mine, about hiring in DevRel, and that is a talk for another day, because it's hard to get your first DevRel job. Is quite hard, right? Because you have to have, it's quite a difficult CV that you need to put together, but a lot of people within DevRel really pride themselves, and I do, right? And I pride themselves in their varied backgrounds, right? One of my team members in Vonage, her career started out as a women's professional basketball player in the NBA in the US, right? I would say, I mean, I thought I had a bit of a strange background with theatre. that's a pretty novel background, right? And loads of us are like this. We have non-traditional backgrounds, but then we got into tech because we got into coding. It helps a lot, I think, because of a mixture of diversity and empathy, of understanding how difficult it is to get into tech, right? If you look at the bar to entry, specifically in things like JavaScript and Node worlds, right? Node is like not an easier barrier to entry. When I first started learning PHP, right, it was almost felt like child's play. The only kind of low bar like that now is probably Python. If you want to get into the Python community is amazing, and they can mentor you really well into that. Other areas of tech is really hard. So within that kind of mixture, it gives you the kind of empathy superpower of like understanding how difficult it is for people. Is it required? No, it's not required. If you wanted to be a straight engineer, and then you wanted to get into that path by starting to do some writing or starting to do some speaking, right? You can just do that. It's not required, but I think it's quite nice to have a varied kind of environment. I think a lot of the senior developer relations, and hopefully they don't all sting me for this, a lot of them take pride in it quite a lot, of saying, we're all from diverse backgrounds, but if you want to come into this as a junior, and I don't like that term, and a lot of people in DevRel don't like that term because because I think it's sort of demeaning of saying, like, you're a junior developer. People still use those terms, but I prefer kind of experience and abilities and skills. They say that this is great, but it's not. I don't think it's necessary. Unfortunately, one of the byproducts of DevRel is that you talk a lot, and therefore that means, unfortunately, I ramble and I have to get to the point more concisely. So apologies for not just saying, it doesn't matter. That's what I should have said.
It's okay. We're already running behind time, but the good news is that the next thing's in at 5 p.m.
Cool.
So yeah, we got some time for some more questions. There's some more from Twitch, actually. A question from Chris on giving lightning talks. Would you say it matters if someone has spoken on the subject before?
No, because a lot of it comes down to approach on how you want to convey what it is you're speaking on, right? So if you had like a specific JavaScript library, right, and someone's done a talk on that before, the thing is that some of these libraries do if Express is a really good idea, right? If someone else has done a lightning talk of 10 minutes on Express, right? Express does quite. I know it's technically like a sort of a slimlined, Flask-like kind of microservice-y kind of framework, but it still does a lot of stuff, right? So if someone else has done it, you might want to touch on a completely different subject, like a completely different area of what Express does, right? Or you might want to bring in another library and see how Express sort of talks to that library and how to integrate the two things, right? So there's so many things that you can talk about within the same sphere of technology or the same specific thing. But really, it's about the message and getting feedback on how you want to approach that and speak on that matter. Like testing, for instance, is another great example. Testing is probably one of the hottest subjects right now because it's just not used enough in the industry. I've seen it in the professional industry, like in the actual commercial environments where the thing is ship it immediately. It doesn't matter if there's tests or not, right? So in a lot of DevRel and a lot of engineering, that are actually people that are engineers and speaking, they want to convey how important testing is. There's how many ways to skin a cat with testing, right? There's so many different approaches that you can take. It's really what people take away from your lightning talk is the key thing. So it doesn't matter. As long as there's slightly, if you give exactly the same talk, I think people might notice. Just copy the speaker notes and then read it out again. Yeah, don't do that.
Awesome. Yeah, Chris on that says, my talk on testing was always getting questions because people don't always get it. And I kind of assumed in the background, it was Chris Miller, my former colleague at Jump 24. I hope everyone attended his talk earlier, and his testing talk is actually really good as well. That's exactly the kind of thing that I was talking about there. Awesome. Next question is from Aaron, our friendly representative for Majestic. Go chat to him in the Discord. Do you ever feel concerned part of your rel responsibilities are causing you to miss out on some of the other dev aspects of the company?
Why I don't really get all the sort of quotation marks.
Yeah, I didn't realize how many there were until I started.
I don't really. I think this boils. This comes down to your experience at the specific company that you're doing developer relations for, because the requirements of each company of how much dev and how much rel and how much marketing and how much product and how much outreach, right? It's all sort of jumbled up and everyone has different interpretations of it. And to be honest, people can have people like a C-level executive or someone that comes in as a VP or a director somewhere can have a completely different vision of how their dev role should look. And to be honest, it might not work. And the CEOs just go, we've been doing this for 2 years and it's costing a bucket load of money and budget. And they might can the entire thing. And then suddenly they realize they do need it, but then they have to reboot from scratch. And then someone else comes and reboot. So every company's requirements of what that is different. So when you come in, that's exactly the kind of the FOMO you get from dev activities. I can't have any fear of missing out of traditional kind of dev activities, because my day-to-day activities of what I do at Vonage is we do retrospectives, we do sprints, we use Jira for tickets. I do tickets and devs and and I do PRs, and we do code review, and we do testing, and we do code review and peer review other people's PRs. So as far as I'm concerned, in my day-to-day, almost most of the time, I'm a dev. So in my job at Vonage, I don't get to miss out on any of that. Do other people feel the same way? Yes, they do, because you do regularly see people sometimes coming out of DevRel and going straight back into engineering. It does happen. Or you get the same people that have engineering you get engineers that have gone heavy down that route, and they've come previously from things like documentation writing, which is very like a niche part of DevRel that a lot of companies have their own docs divisions specifically, and they're like, I'm fed up of engineering. I want to go back into full-time docs writing. You can kind of chop and change, but as a personal question for me, I don't feel like I'm missing out on any of the hardcore engineering. And some of the hardcore engineering, I get to maintain like a PHP SDK to the best of my abilities and to what the PHP community actually want and how PHP as a language is evolving, right? So I get to do all of the high-level concepts of engineering within PHP, and I leave all of the other kind of more DevOpsy, big Vonage engineering that I probably couldn't do. I mean, I don't even know. I think it's probably like a big load of like Rust or Java or stuff like that. I am not a senior engineering like level to be able to do those kind of things, but as a developer, I know what developers want, so it places me kind of in that kind of area.
Awesome. A couple more questions, but first, a quick SOS to the other organizers. Could someone grab my laptop charger? Can I get an F in the chat, please? Can I borrow yours? Maybe. Mine's on the camera. Anyway, while they're getting that, thanks for the Fs in the chat. Considering in DevRel you represent the company, how easy is it to deal with changing companies?
Or I'll tell you what. I want to be all sort of like, I'm going to put a very serious DevRel hat on here. And part of doing DevRel well is about honesty. And the honesty here is I can't answer that question because I haven't done one massive switch from one big DevRel team to another. I'm in a big DevRel team now. My previous employer with as you've heard from Chris and you've heard Chris speak at Jump24, that was quite a niche role, where I was kind of on my own for a bit of that, and moving from one thing to the other, right, was a jump of going from trying to do something a bit like a bit on the side to being part of a big job where this is a defined thing, right? So I haven't done a massive switch like that, and I have in terms of speaking to all of my my peers within the industry, like I have kind of alluded to, within the DevRel niche, it doesn't really matter what company you're from. All of the people that are regarded as, we regard ourselves as practitioners, talk across companies to each other a lot, and it's quite small. It's unbelievable how well everyone knows each other's business, and if you don't know that person directly, you almost certainly know 1 degree of separation, and that's it. So you hear about their experiences, and their experiences are vastly different. But all I have is their experiences, and well, in really, like, honestly, confidential experiences of loads and loads of anecdotes. But I haven't done it myself. So part of DevRel is honesty, and like, I haven't done that, so I can't properly answer it.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. This is from Liam Sauter. What makes a good content strategy?
Oh, I mean, that's just like the last one from Liam, and Liam specifically,
like
who has done. I mean, that's. I think Liam's throwing that at me, but specifically because they have done DevRel. I don't know if. I don't know if they're still doing DevRel, but I mean that's recent. Until very recently, DevRel for AWS, right? The content strategy needs to be like this is like as a last question, like I said, this is an absolutely open-ended, massive question, right? And content strategy can be written by one person who does the job on their own, or there's like 2 people within DevRel, right, who have to wear all of the hats. Or you're talking about content strategy with a DevRel team of 50 people. I mean, like, in Vonage alone, our team numbers just under 40 within our team. So our content strategy is overarching, is like absolutely massive. And our community manager Rachel is writing like a content strategy at the moment. It's like the thing is just like an absolute like monster. So it can be very varied. I wrote a content strategy for my last role, so I'm going to sort of focus on that specifically. You've got your goal in developer relations is your one goal only, right? And that is to connect to your audience and to connect to your developers. If you make it too much about yourself, like personal branding is quite important because you need that kind of visibility. But if you don't make it about connecting the developers, because after all, that's what your company are paying you to do, right? Then you're kind of missing your mark. So your content strategy needs to be focused like entirely around how to do the outreach and how to get the feedback back from the communities that you are focusing. So it's like identifying who those communities are, because you might not know, identifying where they are, and from that content bit of strategy, if you write sort of blog posts and stuff, getting some Google Analytics where you can. Sometimes that can be quite difficult, especially if a lot of your targeted audience are devs, because a lot of them are quite wise to this and, funnily enough, don't like things like Facebook and have lots and lots of content tracking blocking. But learning where those communities are, learning where the meetups are. Like, for instance, in my kind of world, I only discovered recently the heaviest uses of PHP I assumed would be the UK and Israel. I mean, Randos Ledendorf, who actually created the language, is from Israel. Zend, who created the first big organization and wrote the kind of the parser and the engine were from Israel, specifically Tel Aviv, right? You'd assume that that's just where they are, but you look at the language statistics, and the biggest consumers are the US, Russia, and Brazil, and to some lesser extent, China and Japan. Asynchronous PHP is focused entirely in China. Your content strategy needs to be focused on where those people are and reaching out to them in that capacity. So what makes a good strategy is focusing on where the devs are and how you hit them with it. So how much streaming, how much outreach via Twitch or YouTube, how much blog post writing, and how to reach them one-to-one via things like Discord, Slack, even traditional forums. It doesn't matter whether it's an older form of communication or a new form of communication, it's how to get feedback from. So it has to encompass all of those things.
Awesome. Well played, Liam, with that question, and very good job with the answer.
Thanks for exhausting me, Liam. I kind of delved deeper. I was like, people must be absolutely exhausted, especially if they've taken time out from like doing like actual cool hackathon projects to listening to me like blather on about what I do.
Liam says, final boss question.
What that definitely was final boss of the internet question
Handled it very well.
from someone who does this right for a living. So
yeah. Very good to talk to you, Jim. A reminder to everyone else that you can message Jim on the Discord about Fusion or whatever you want. And apart from that, a reminder that the next thing in the schedule is the scary BJSS talk at 5 p.m.
That sounds like good fun.
Yeah. So tune in for that, and goodbye for now.